Okay guys, it's May 18th, just a little past 8 in the evening. We're back on the 5.5 this evening, and we're trying to button it up. Hopefully it won't be long, and we'll actually be putting some power to this thing and running through some tests on some lights and stuff and see what's going on. Let me show you what we've got done so far. Starting to look like a dashboard again. I went ahead and I've got the steering column taken apart, and I have the video of that, and I'm going to be putting together a little segment on that in case anybody wants to see how that's done. I actually thought it was going to be a lot more involved, but it actually wasn't too bad. Those connections down there at the bottom, that's all for the steering column and the horn. But I've also got the tack installed, the light switch is installed, and the main harness is already installed. And that area behind the instrument cluster there is a real tight fit. It's really hard to get that instrument cluster in the dash, let alone be able to hook the wires up. They don't give you much slack. And I'm not exactly sure who makes this harness. I've seen some pictures online that this harness is actually separate from the main harness and can actually plug in, so you could actually wire it on the bench and then put it in the car, and all you've got to do is plug in a connector. That probably is the way to go, because it really fought me getting everything connected, and I'm hoping I got everything right and I don't have to go back into it. The only reason I haven't put the clock back in yet is that Excalibur alarm system has a battery backup, and I don't want to plug that up until I'm for sure my wiring's right and I'm not going to have to disconnect the battery. I got the fuses all in the fuse panel there, and that was a chore to find the right size fuses, because they're the short ones, and even up top there, one of them is actually a real smaller one, almost exactly like the headlight switch has one just like that. I don't know why in the world GM ever put a fuse on the headlight switch, but there's one on it back up in there. And I started to put a pigtail on it and bring it down here with an inline, but I talked to the owner about that, and he said that he would forget about it, and I said, yeah, I probably would too, so we just decided to leave it there. I'll try to put the camera up behind the dash and you can see what it looks like, but it is packed. I don't know what all's showing up, but you wouldn't think for a 55 Chevy it would be all that much wiring up in there, but it is. So I got to make a few connections here at the battery, and that's what I'm working on now. And then I've got some clamps that I was going to try to put in the fender well and get rid of those clips that it has, and got a good deal on some of these Ideal clamps. They had them on clearance at Lowe's for, I think it was 30-some cents a piece, so I thought that was a pretty good buy. I should have bought a bunch of them, but I bought just two because that's all I needed right now. But I want to show you these connections that I'm making at the battery. So that first connection there is actually for the vintage air system. And then this next one right there will be to an inline fuse, and it will go to our accessory bus. Now the one for the vintage air, I did mention to you guys before, it does have a circuit breaker under the dash. This is that inline fuse that I'm using, and I'm going to put, I'd probably get away with a 30, maybe I've got a 40 here. I've actually got both. I've got the 30 and the 40. But that alarm is 15 amps and I've got that fan on it, so I think I'm gonna go ahead and put a 40. The owner of the car, he don't really use that fan a lot, so it's always been wired to a switch, so that's the way I went ahead and wired it back. I would really like to put that on a relay, and maybe sometime in the future we will. But I've been using these crimp connections, and this is just an old pair of pliers that my dad had a long time ago, and you can't hardly read it, but it's got the gauges as for which one of these indentions you use. And I actually just looked at the name brand of these pliers just a few minutes ago, and they're Thomas and Betts. I've used some of their splicing kits at work. It's actually a pretty good pair of pliers, but I'm not really a big fan of crimp connections. They work good for a while, and then once your copper starts oxidizing and gets a little corrosion, you get a high resistance open in them. You get a little bit of resistance built up. So I like to take it one step further and come in here after I crimp it and just add a little bit of solder. Now, the solder does tend to loosen these insulators up, but you can push them back up while they're hot, and when they cool off, they'll go back to being very solid. But even take it one step further, I'll go ahead and put me a little piece of heat shrink on it, and I'll bring it up over the soldered connections right there. I'll usually shrink it down to about right there, and I try to do that on all my connections. That way they last a long time. You don't have to worry about it. There's probably better ways of doing it, but that's how I've been doing it so far. That's my soldering iron there that I've had kicking around since I was 18. Okay guys, I got my battery connection made on the positive side. I ain't sure if I'm real crazy about that, but there's really no other way to do it. I was going to have one red wire there anyway, but you can still see that inline fuse that I have. And like I said, you can still see all these other wires. Eventually, I think I would like to get to where I wire these things and you see no wires. Okay, so right away I opened the door, and that relay for that alarm is doing something. It's clicking on and off, so I've got to figure that out. It's actually the onboard relay in the alarm itself. There's my park lights. My headlights. Park lights went out. Not sure if it's supposed to do that. They're all back there in the back. Tail lights are on. Alright, right there they are. So I got to figure that out. I know Mark had the same issue on his Camaro, but I don't know about a 55. Gas gauge looks like it's working. It's registering half a tank. We'll cut some lights off. See if instrument gauge lights are working. They are, but kind of dim. Alright, so I've got a little issue. I bumped the starter and it didn't hit. It tried to, but then again, it still may be this alarm. So I'm going to do some reading on this alarm and see what we got, and I'll let you know what I find out. Okay guys, we're still working on the 5.5 project and been doing some testing, and I think I figured out the issue with the alarm. The siren on it, one of the reasons it wasn't chirping is it's went bad. I've taken it all apart here, but it's definitely defective, and I've checked the output of the alarm, and I've checked it at the wire as an input to the siren, and I've got 12 volts there when the alarm is activated. So, but the main reason I was having trouble with the alarm when I first powered it up is the key fob. The battery was dead in it. It was questionable. And once I took it out and I actually spun it, I don't know if it rejuvenated it or what, but it started working. When I tested it with my voltage meter, it puts a load on it and it come up as question mark whether or not it was good or not. So I went ahead and picked one of those up. And I did have the owner of the car down last night and we was looking over everything. And the issue with the park lights and the headlights, that is the way it's supposed to be on a 55. So he said they didn't come on, he told me the year, but like on my Camaro, they are supposed to come on when the headlights are on. So, but that's just the way it is on this car. So I'm waiting on the steering column pieces. Like I said, his son is painting those for us, and hopefully that'll be done this weekend and I can finish the column. I think I am gonna go ahead this evening and put the seat in it. I'm gonna vacuum it out and put the seat back in, and then all I have to do is the column work. Everything else that I can tell is working. I did fire it up and I thought I had it on camera, but the camera was on, but I hadn't pressed the record button. I had turned off the record button and started working on the car, and once I got the remote figured out on the alarm, I fired it up and I thought all that was on camera and it wasn't, but that's okay because we're gonna start it again. So it's kind of disappointed for me because it was the first fire up since the new wiring and everything, and I didn't even get it on camera. So I apologize for that. I've lost some footage for the steering column as well. Got a video coming out on it, and so I lost the footage on that, some of that as well. So it happens. But anyway, I'm going to show you one thing on the car. I did go ahead and redo that battery. I rerouted my wires and made those primary wires come in from the back on the positive post. I think it looks a whole lot better. That's one of the things I told him I didn't like about it, and I don't think he liked it neither, so I opted to see what we could do about turning it around. And that way, that'll match the negative side too, once the negative side's on the car. I went ahead and put the dashboard back together. We've got the glove box all together on the car now. About to wrap it up, guys. I got to get the seat in, and then I've got the alarm siren on order. It'll be here first of the week. As soon as it gets here, I'll put it in. It's probably about 15 minutes. And then the steering column parts, that's probably about a 30-minute job. And the clock. I've just got the clock sitting out of it right now because I don't have the battery backup plugged in on the alarm. And other than that, we'll run through some tests. We'll start it up. I want to double check, make sure that the alternator is charging the battery. And I want to double check, make sure the vintage air is getting cold. I'll do some more checking on the alarm once the siren's on. And I think that's it. She'll be leaving. So anyway, guys, when I have a little bit more progress, I'll bring you back.